He studied how criminals get caught, but his own phone and car betrayed him. Despite being a criminology PhD student, Bryan Kohberger could not escape the technology that tracked his every move. From phone records to surveillance cameras and DNA databases, each trace became a piece of the puzzle that pointed straight to him. In November 2022, University of Idaho students were murdered in a quiet college town. At first, there were no eyewitnesses, no clear suspects, but investigators followed the data. The white Hyundai Elantra caught on video, the cell tower pings showing suspicious movements, and the DNA from a knife sheath left behind at the crime scene. And now, with newly unsealed documents and bodycam footage, even more details have come to light about how investigators built their case. But the most surprising clue came from a traffic stop months before the murders, caught on camera and hiding in plain sight. The newly released investigation files gave the public its first real glimpse into how carefully police were building their case. And buried inside those documents was a bodycam video that suddenly feels chilling to watch today. On August 21, 2022, just 3 months before the murders, Bryan Kohberger was pulled over in Moscow, Idaho, not far from the campus. The footage shows him driving the same white Hyundai Elantra that would later become one of the most important pieces of evidence in the case. The stop itself was routine. He wasn't wearing a seatbelt. But when the officer asked why, Kohberger replied that he was just being honest. At the time, it seemed harmless, almost forgettable. But investigators later planned to use that clip in court to highlight his calm and calculated demeanor. The documents also revealed how police quietly gathered digital breadcrumbs long before his arrest. Surveillance cameras placed the Elantra circling the victim's neighborhood multiple times in the early hours of the night. Each drive-by was noted, logged, and preserved. And when the murders occurred, that same car was spotted again, leaving the area at high speed. What once looked like a meaningless traffic violation had, in hindsight, become the first public appearance of a suspect hiding in plain sight. And as more files were unsealed, it became clear that this was just the beginning of how technology would corner him. But if the car linked him to the scene, the digital evidence from his phone would reveal something even harder to explain. If the white Hyundai Elantra placed Bryan Kohberger near the victim's home, his phone records made that link impossible to ignore. Investigators pulled months of data and noticed something unusual. On the night of the murders, his phone was completely dark, switched off, during the exact window of time the killings took place. Yet just before and just after, it reappeared on the network, pinging towers close to the victim's house. Prosecutors later argued that this gap wasn't coincidence. It was a deliberate attempt to hide his movements, but the digital trail didn't stop there. Cell tower records showed that Kohberger's phone had been in the same neighborhood at least 12 different times before the murders. Almost every one of those visits came late at night or early in the morning, raising chilling questions about whether he was stalking the house. Then came the surveillance footage. Multiple cameras across Moscow captured a white Elantra driving repeated loops around the victim's street in the early hours of November 13, 2022. One clip even showed the car leaving the area at high speed just minutes after the estimated time of the murders. Investigators cross-referenced these movements with the phone pings, and the patterns lined up almost perfectly. Still, police knew they needed something more concrete. That breakthrough came with DNA evidence. At the crime scene, a knife sheath was found near one of the victims. On its snap button was a trace of male DNA. When compared against samples collected from trash outside Kohberger's family home in Pennsylvania, it was a match. In court filings, investigators described it as the single piece of evidence that anchored their case. Finally, prosecutors revealed that Kohberger had been deleting files from his devices in the weeks surrounding the murders. For a man who studied criminal behavior, the attempt seemed desperate, an effort to erase digital traces that only raised more suspicion. Each breadcrumb by itself might not have been enough, but together, the phone gaps, surveillance loops, DNA match, and deleted files formed a digital map prosecutors say only one person could fit: Bryan Kohberger. But the documents didn't just highlight data and devices, they also revealed something unusual about Kohberger himself, once he was locked behind bars. Once Bryan Kohberger was arrested and placed in jail, investigators began to notice another pattern. this time in his personal habits. Reports from fellow inmates and officers described him as obsessive, isolated, and strangely repetitive. He would spend 45 to 60 minutes in the shower, far longer than anyone else. He was often seen scrubbing his hands over and over, sometimes dozens of times a day. Guards also noted that he stayed awake through most of the night, pacing his cell or staring silently, only sleeping in short bursts during daylight hours. To many observers, these behaviors looked less like routine and more like compulsions, almost as if he was constantly trying to wash something away or control an environment he couldn't escape. Some psychologists suggested it could point to obsessive-compulsive traits, an endless cycle of rituals meant to relieve inner tension. What makes this detail striking is how it mirrors his digital actions before arrest. Just as he washed and rewrote the same routines in his cell, prosecutors say he had been deleting and wiping files from his devices in the weeks after the murders. A desperate attempt to cleanse his digital footprint, just as he tried to cleanse himself physically. The unsealed jail records also revealed that Kohberger avoided contact with other inmates, rarely spoke, and gave off a presence that even hardened prisoners found unsettling. He wasn't violent inside, but he was unnervingly controlled, always watching, always calculating. These jail patterns didn't prove his guilt, but they gave the public a rare window into the mindset of a man accused of 4 brutal murders. And prosecutors would later use these contrasts, the obsessive cleaning, the deleted files, as part of their portrait of Kohberger in court. But the strongest picture came not from behavior, but from the legal strategies built around this mountain of digital evidence. For prosecutors, the challenge was never about finding evidence. It was about showing how each piece connected. In court filings, they laid out a clear roadmap. Bryan Kohberger wasn't caught by chance. He was caught because his own decisions left behind a trail no one could erase. The first cornerstone was phone data. Prosecutors emphasized how his device went dark just before the murders, then reappeared minutes afterward. They described it as an intentional silence, proof that he was trying to hide his movements. Combined with months of late-night visits to the victim's neighborhood, it suggested planning rather than coincidence. The second pillar was surveillance. Jurors would have been shown a timeline of the white Hyundai Elantra looping past the victim's home again and again. Each clip would be synchronized with cell tower records, creating a layered map that pointed to one driver. Then came the DNA match on the knife sheath. Prosecutors called it the anchor, the piece of evidence that transformed suspicion into certainty. They argued that DNA didn't just place him at the scene, it tied him directly to the weapon used in the crime. Finally, they focused on his attempts to delete digital files. Investigators discovered that Kohberger had been erasing and wiping data from his devices in the days following the murders. To the prosecution, this wasn't random housekeeping, it was evidence of guilt. One prosecutor even noted that the effort to clean his devices mirrored his obsessive cleaning habits inside jail, reinforcing the image of a man desperately trying to erase what couldn't be erased. Their strategy was simple but powerful. Show jurors that the digital evidence wasn't a series of coincidences, but a chain. Each link, phone, car, DNA, deleted files, fit together too perfectly to belong to anyone else. And while the defense searched for cracks in that chain, the prosecution prepared to argue that in today's world, data never lies. But beyond the courtroom, the case wasn't just about evidence. It was also about the people left behind, the families and communities still living with the impact of what happened. While investigators built their case through data and digital traces, the weight of the crime was always carried by the families of the victims. For them, every new document, every new piece of footage was not just evidence. It was a reminder of what they had lost. At Kohberger's sentencing, parents and siblings stood before the court to describe their pain. Kaylee Goncalves' family spoke of birthdays that will never come, of a daughter who had dreams she never got to chase. Ethan Chapin's loved ones described the silence left in their home, the empty chair at family gatherings, and the impact wasn't limited to families alone. In Moscow, Idaho, a quiet college town where residents rarely locked their doors, fear became part of daily life. Even now, locals describe how the murders changed the way they live, checking locks twice, avoiding dark streets, feeling that sense of safety permanently broken. What made it even harder for the families was the cruelty of the digital age. During the sentencing, They revealed they had been receiving threatening messages and texts, a haunting echo of how technology both solves crimes and continues to wound those left behind. For prosecutors, the digital trail proved guilt. But for the victims' families, it was the story behind the numbers that mattered. The laughter, the futures, the lives stolen. And as the trial delays continue, their demand remains the same: justice, no matter how long it takes. Bryan Kohberger studied crime for years, convinced he understood what made killers slip up. Yet in the end, it wasn't a dramatic chase or a witness that brought him down. It was the silent record left behind by his own devices. Phone pings, surveillance footage, DNA, and even the files he tried to delete. Every trace built a timeline he couldn't escape. This case proves a simple truth. In today's world, the digital trail is almost impossible to erase. For investigators, it became the roadmap to justice. For the victims' families, it was the evidence that brought answers, even if it could never bring their loved ones back. So what do you think? Was it Kohberger's arrogance, his mistakes, or the power of technology that sealed his fate? Share your thoughts in the comments. This is Crime Shade. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more.